Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Monday, April 20th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside today, we are looking at a high of 80.7 degrees and a low of 56.0 degrees, providing a mild day for the start of your week. On the program today, we are examining the fallout in the Middle East after the seizure of an Iranian ship resulted in the collapse of the ceasefire. We are also taking a closer look at the significant leadership and staffing challenges that federal law enforcement agencies are currently facing. Along with those deep dives, we will have a look at other stories making headlines around the globe. There is a lot to get to on today's episode of Alex's News, so please stay tuned for all the details. We start this morning with a rapidly deteriorating situation in the Middle East. The region is on what analysts are calling a 72-hour hair trigger after the U.S. Navy seized an Iranian cargo ship yesterday. Ethan has been tracking this all night. Ethan, walk us through what happened in the Gulf of Oman.
So yesterday, Sunday, April 19th, the U.S. Navy guided missile destroyer USS Spruance intercepted a 900-foot Iranian-flagged container ship called the Tuska in the North Arabian Sea. According to the Stamford Advocate and Military Times, the Spruance issued radio warnings for 6 straight hours, telling the vessel to stop. When the Tuska refused to halt or change course toward the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas, the destroyer fired disabling rounds from its 5-inch Mk-45 gun into the ship's engine room. Once the propulsion was knocked out, U.S. Marines from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit launched from the amphibious assault ship USS Tripoli and boarded via helicopter.
So the ship was essentially dead in the water before Marines went aboard. What was it allegedly carrying?
President Trump posted on social media that the military is currently, quote, seeing what's on board, end quote. But the Washington Post and the Telegraph report the Tuska is suspected of carrying a massive shipment of sodium perchlorate. That's a critical chemical precursor for solid rocket fuel used in Iranian ballistic missiles. The chemical was allegedly loaded at the Galan port in Zhuhai, China, which adds a whole other diplomatic layer to this.
And the U.S. says the ship was trying to run through a blockade. Is that what actually happened?
This is where it gets really interesting, because there's a significant gap between what the administration is saying and what independent maritime data shows. Tankertrackers.com and Marine Traffic both confirm through AIS tracking data that the Tuska was following its standard, pre-scheduled commercial route from Port Klang, Malaysia, to Iran. Neutral analysts noted the ship didn't use deceptive maneuvers or GPS spoofing to hide its location. The so-called evasion the U.S. cites really just refers to the crew refusing to obey interception orders in what many consider international waters.
So the crew didn't comply with orders, but they weren't sneaking around either. Was this ship already on Washington's radar?
Absolutely. The Washington Post noted that the Tuska, with International Maritime Organization number 9328900, was already under U.S. Treasury sanctions through IRISL for a history of procuring materials for Iran's missile program. So the ship wasn't unknown to American intelligence. The naval blockade of Iranian ports was only established on April 13th, just 6 days before this interception, and the Tuska was likely already en route.
Now, this timing could not be worse diplomatically. There are supposed to be peace talks today, right?
That's exactly right. A high-level U.S. delegation, including Vice President J.D. Vance, Jared Kushner, and Steve Witkoff, was scheduled to begin historic face-to-face talks in Islamabad, Pakistan today, Monday, April 20th. According to CNN and the Times of Israel, those talks are now in a state of de facto cancellation. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Bakai and President Masoud Pezeshkian both labeled the seizure an, quote, act of piracy, end quote, and called it a betrayal of diplomacy. Tehran has officially refused to participate, saying they won't negotiate, while Washington undermines the ceasefire with military action.
So the ceasefire is effectively dead. How is Iran responding militarily?
Iran's Khatam al-Anbiya military command vowed a swift response, and they've delivered one. They've formally reclosed the Strait of Hormuz to all commercial traffic. Gulf News and The Guardian report an immediate 94% drop in traffic through that choke point, which normally carries roughly 20% of the world's oil. On top of that, Fars and Tasnim news agencies reported the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched a swarm of drones targeting U.S. naval assets, though CENTCOM has not confirmed damage to any warships.
A 94% traffic drop is staggering. What's that doing to energy markets?
Global oil prices surged 5 to 7.5% overnight, and traders are bracing for worse if this drags on. We're talking about one of the most critical energy choke points on Earth being effectively shut down. Every day that strait stays closed, the economic pressure builds not just on the U.S. and Iran, but on every nation that depends on Gulf oil shipments.
Were there warning signs before yesterday's seizure that things were escalating?
There were. The United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations, known as UKMTO, and the International Maritime Organization both verified that Iranian forces had already harassed or fired upon commercial vessels from India and France on April 18th, the day before the Tuska was seized. The U.S. used those incidents as its primary justification for escalating the blockade, so you had this cycle of provocation already building before the intercept happened.
Let's talk about the legal framework here. Can the U.S. just establish a blockade and start boarding ships?
International law experts cited by ABC News and the U.S. Naval War College point out that a naval blockade is considered an act of war under UN General Assembly Resolution 3314. That's a key distinction. Establishing a blockade is generally viewed as incompatible with maintaining a ceasefire. So the April 13th blockade, and now the seizure of the Tuska, are being treated by international observers as the functional end of the truce that was established on April 8th. In other words, the ceasefire may have been dead before the Tuska was even stopped.
Remind us how this broader conflict started and what the human cost has been so far.
This conflict began on February 28th of this year following a breakdown in nuclear negotiations. Reports from Georgia Today and the Associated Press indicate that over 3,000 people have died in Iran and 2,290 in Lebanon. Military losses include 15 Israeli soldiers and 13 U.S. service members. Those numbers have been climbing steadily, and with the ceasefire now collapsed, there's real fear they'll accelerate rapidly.
What's China saying about all this, given the allegations about Chinese chemicals on board?
Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Guo Jiakun expressed, quote, deep concern, end quote, and condemned the U.S. military action as irresponsible and a threat to global trade stability. But here's what's notable. While Beijing protested the act of seizure itself, it has carefully avoided addressing the specific allegations about Chinese chemical precursors found aboard the vessel. That silence on the sodium perchlorate question is being closely watched by diplomats.
So where do things stand right now, this morning?
As of this morning, the Tuska remains in U.S. custody in the North Arabian Sea. The original ceasefire deadline of Wednesday, April 22nd, is just 2 days away, and it's looking increasingly meaningless given that both sides have already resumed hostile actions. The Strait of Hormuz remains closed, peace talks are off the table, and the region is bracing for what could be a return to open warfare. Essentially, everyone is watching to see whether the next 72 hours bring some kind of off-ramp or a full-scale escalation.
A critical few days ahead, Ethan. Thank you for walking us through all of that.
Of course, Grace.
We'll stay on this story as it develops. Still ahead, our second story this morning. We turn now to a story that's been building for months. Deep turmoil inside the FBI and the Department of Justice under Director Kash Patel. Chloe has been tracking all of it. Chloe, let's start with the director himself. A pretty damning report dropped just 3 days ago.
That's right, Grace. On April 17th, The Atlantic published what might be the most detailed account yet of problems inside Patel's FBI. The report draws on testimony from more than 24 current and former officials, and it describes his leadership as, quote, rudderless, end quote, and, quote, erratic, end quote. Sources told The Atlantic that the director is frequently unreachable during critical hours, and they cite what they call bouts of excessive drinking at private clubs in Washington, D.C. and Las Vegas. His publicist, Erica Knight, has dismissed all of this as, quote, fake news hit pieces, end quote, but the accounts keep piling up from multiple outlets.
Unreachable during critical hours. How serious has that actually gotten?
Extremely serious, by some accounts. The Associated Press and the New York Times both reported on one incident where aides actually considered using breaching equipment, that's standard SWAT entry tools, to gain access to Patel's quarters. Security personnel could not wake him during a period of heightened national security tension involving Iran. Think about that for a moment. The people closest to the FBI director were weighing whether to physically break down a door to reach him during what appears to have been a genuine crisis.
And then there's the incident at the Winter Olympics in Italy earlier this year.
Right. Back in February 2026, Patel was filmed flying on a government jet to the Winter Olympics in Italy. Videos surfaced of him chugging beer in the locker room with the U.S. men's hockey team. Now, beyond the optics, there's a legal dimension here. The Campaign Legal Center has filed formal complaints alleging Patel misused government aircraft for at least 10 personal trips without reimbursement. So this isn't just about embarrassing footage. It's about potential violations of federal travel rules.
Let's talk about what's happening below the leadership level, because there's been a massive staffing crisis.
Massive is the right word. According to Newsday and the Las Vegas Sun, the DOJ has lost nearly 1,000 assistant U.S. attorneys over the last year alone. That's an enormous number, Grace. The attrition comes from a combination of what the administration calls deferred resignation programs and what whistleblowers describe as a political retribution campaign. When you lose that many experienced prosecutors in that short a time, you don't just lose people. You lose institutional knowledge that took decades to build.
And some of those departures weren't exactly voluntary, were they?
No, not at all. In February 2026, Patel reportedly ordered the dismissal of 10 to 12 staffers who had been involved in the 2022 through 2023 investigation into President Trump's handling of classified documents. The Associated Press has further reported that Patel maintains what insiders call a hit list of employees deemed, quote, insufficiently loyal, end quote. Senior leadership in key field offices, including Atlanta and New York, has been removed. The FBI Agents Association, the FBIAA, has issued sharp condemnations, calling the firings, quote, unlawful, end quote, and saying they are, quote, destabilizing the workforce, end quote.
So with all these veterans walking out or being pushed out, how is the Bureau filling those seats?
Director Patel has rolled out what he calls a modernization of the bureaucratic pipeline, and the changes are sweeping. The Middletown Press and the Associated Press have both reported on the details. One of the biggest shifts involves training. Transfers from other federal agencies like the DEA or ATF now complete a 9-week training academy instead of the traditional 4-month course, which ran 18 weeks. That's cutting the program roughly in half. Patel has defended all of this with the mantra, quote, let good cops be cops, end quote. And he claims a 112% increase in applications since streamlining the process.
What about the screening and vetting side of things? Those standards changed too.
Significantly. The Bureau has waived the previously required written assessments and the 3-member panel interviews that were used to judge character and judgment. Reports also indicate the college degree requirement has been eliminated for some new recruit classes. On the DOJ side, they've suspended a long-standing policy requiring federal prosecutors to have at least 1 year of legal experience, so now lawyers can be hired directly out of law school. And to manage the workload, the DOJ is enlisting military lawyers, JAG officers, to serve as special prosecutors.
There was also something about polygraph waivers for senior appointees.
Yes, and this one really alarmed career officials. Patel reportedly granted polygraph test waivers for high-ranking political appointees, including Deputy Director Dan Bongino, exempting them from standard background checks for sensitive access. So you have people at the very top of the nation's premier law enforcement agency who haven't gone through the same security screening that a rank-and-file agent would face. That's a significant departure from decades of protocol.
All right, so what's the actual impact been on the FBI and DOJ's ability to do their jobs?
The numbers tell a concerning story. The DOJ Fraud Section's 2025 year-in review revealed a 22% decline in trial convictions, even though there was a 10% increase in total individuals charged. Critics say the gap shows a shift toward volume over high-stakes litigation success. In other words, the agencies are bringing more cases but winning fewer of them at trial. That's a troubling trajectory for organizations whose credibility depends on their conviction record.
And some specialized divisions have been hit especially hard.
The National Security Division's espionage section has seen a 40% drop in prosecutors. That directly hinders the ability to build complex multi-year foreign espionage cases, the kind that take enormous patience and expertise. Then there's the Public Integrity section, known as PIN, which is responsible for prosecuting corruption. It's been reduced from 36 career lawyers to just 2 lawyers handling all federal public corruption work. That collapse has already led to the dismissal of high-profile cases, including corruption charges against the mayor of New York, after career prosecutors refused to sign off on the dismissal.
There have also been cases thrown out for procedural reasons, right?
That's one of the most concrete signs of institutional breakdown. According to Just Security, dozens of cases have been dismissed due to Speedy Trial Act violations because depleted offices simply missed critical deadlines. One notable example is USA versus Timberlake, a federal firearms indictment that was dismissed because the government could not meet its discovery obligations. These aren't cases lost on the merits. They're cases lost because there literally weren't enough people to do the paperwork on time.
Where does congressional oversight stand on all of this today?
It's very much in flux. Senate Judiciary Ranking Member Dick Durbin has repeatedly called for an Inspector General investigation into Patel's conduct and what Durbin calls the ongoing purge. But here's the complication. The DOJ Office of the Inspector General is currently led by Acting Inspector General William M. Blyer, who took over after Michael Horowitz departed in 2025. The OIG itself is facing a proposed 28% budget cut. They're reportedly reviewing flight logs and whistleblower disclosures, but no formal report has been released as of today.
And just in the last few days, there was a cybersecurity incident involving the director himself?
Yes, reports from April 16th, just 4 days ago, suggest that Patel's personal email account was breached by Iran-linked hackers. That raises serious alarms about the security posture of the Bureau's leadership, especially under what Patel has branded his FBI 2.0 restructuring. He continues to dismiss the scrutiny as politically motivated, but the FBIAA maintains that the reduction in training and the loss of expertise have left the agencies, quote, hollowed out, end quote, and vulnerable. It's hard to argue with that characterization when the director's own email security has been compromised.
A lot to watch in the weeks ahead. Chloe, thank you for walking us through all of that.
Thanks, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. Japan was shaken to its core today after a powerful 7.5 magnitude earthquake struck off the northeastern coast at 4:53 in the afternoon. While the event caused a tsunami of warnings across Iwate, Aomori, and Hokkaido, the situation eventually settled, though not before 80-centimeter waves made a splash at Kuji Port. Initial forecasts had officials fearing waves as high as 3 meters, or 10 feet, leading to the first significant megaquake advisory since 2011. While transportation hit a bit of a snag with the Tohoku Shinkansen and local rail lines being grounded, the news isn't all earth-shattering. Authorities report no immediate deaths or major structural damage, and regional nuclear facilities managed to keep their cool and remain intact. However, experts warn of a 1% increased risk of a larger seismic event along the Tsushima Trench over the next week. From shifting tectonic plates to shifting policy plates, the United States Secretary of State is prescribing a change in international relations, calling for a transition toward a trade-over-aid model. This new direction signals a departure from traditional humanitarian assistance, with the fiscal year 2027 budget proposing a 46% cut to global health programs. The plan looks to eliminate disease-specific accounts like PEPFAR in favor of an America First global health strategy. While there's a positive dose of news regarding a commitment to provide the long-acting prevention drug lenacapavir to 3 million people by 2028, current funding freezes have already caused a viral headache for HIV clinics in 32 countries, casting a shadow over the goal to end the AIDS epidemic by 2030. While some are looking for cures, others are looking at court dates. Elon Musk and former ex-CEO Linda Yaccarino have been summoned by French prosecutors in a criminal probe investigating the platform's failure to curb disinformation and sexually explicit deepfakes. It seems the Grok artificial intelligence might have been deepfaking it until it didn't make it, specifically regarding content denying crimes against humanity. Meanwhile, Musk's SpaceX has finally found some common ground, reaching a settlement with the California Coastal Commission that clears the deck for a June 2026 stock market listing. Musk is also buckling up for a high-stakes federal trial against OpenAI and Sam Altman, with jury selection set for April 27th in Oakland. In the world of technology, the government is trying to put a leash on the digital beast. The Trump administration is pushing a national policy framework for artificial intelligence to create a federal rulebook, while Senator Marsha Blackburn is drafting the Trump America AI Act to protect innovation from being bogged down. Attorney General Pam Bondi is also preparing a task force to challenge state laws that might be overstepping their bounds. However, some states are already setting boundaries. Tennessee recently passed Senate Bill 1580, which ensures that robots won't be playing therapist by banning artificial intelligence from being marketed as a mental health professional starting July 1, 2026. Across the pond, the European Commission is urging companies to get their ducks in a row before the August 2nd deadline for the EU AI Act. Finally, we have a series of recalls that are really rattling the pantry. Baby food manufacturer HIPP is pulling carrot and potato jars in several European countries after a rat poison scare that officials are calling a dirty trick of criminal tampering. Marks & Spencer is also feeling the heat, recalling its authentic Greek yogurt with vanilla due to a gluten free-for-all where the allergen wasn't declared. In the United Kingdom, Saffron Pastries has been pestered by actual pests, leading to a recall of 25 bakery products. On the road, Stellantis is steering into trouble, filing safety papers for nearly 9,300 vehicles. This includes 2026 Ram 2500 pickups with stability issues and Jeep hybrids that are a little too fire-prone due to engine debris. Owners are encouraged to act fast to avoid any road bumps. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6. Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.